all schools, all institutions, all organizations have a culture. I suppose in its simplest way of looking at it, you might say it's the way we do things here. It's that slightly indefinable characteristic or ethos, and it's built on values and attitudes, and it's lived out in actions and behaviors. But I think caring for every member of the community, both staff and pupils, is really important.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where I'm really delighted to be joined by Margaret White of Sandpiper Consulting, and we're talking about the importance of creating a culture of care within your school, specifically diving into that culture and the way that it impacts staff, the way that we can support the people that are working within our schools so that they are able to do their best work and they feel that they're really engaged by and part of a really caring community. When I first met Margaret, I was really intrigued by this idea because for me, this idea of a culture of care, the way that we create a school culture in which everybody, and in this particular episode we're talking about staff in particular, are feeling respected and cared for in the practicalities of their day-to-day life, is something that school leaders talk about a lot, but it feels to me that we haven't always had a language or an action plan about how to shift and change that culture over time within your school. The conversation I have with Margaret, we talk a little bit about what a culture of care looks like, what we mean by that, and the fact that it's a shared responsibility, the fact that the detail is really important. We talk about how it's really important to celebrate what's going well within your school in terms of your culture of care that you already have, and then dive into some really important action points, so things that you can action within your school that'll help you to identify where the gaps might be, and then take action to make sure that you're curating and cultivating a really strong culture of care within your school. So a little bit about Margaret White before we dive into our conversation. So Sandpiper was founded by Margaret White, an education consultant, author of A Good Education, and former deputy head academic at St Faith's, Cambridge, winner of the TES Prep School of the Year 2019. Margaret studied natural sciences and education at Jesus College, Cambridge, gaining a first-class degree and her teaching qualification. She believes that schools can and should be happy places for children to learn, and she's enjoyed a long career in teaching. In 2018, Routledge published her book, A Good Education, which outlines a new model of learning to enrich every child. She worked as deputy head academic at St Faith's, Cambridge until her recent relocation back to Bath. She's currently patron of the University of Bath Gold Scholarship Programme and a governor of Monkton Combe School. She continues her work as a freelance consultant and writer on educational matters. Margaret's really passionate about providing all children with the best possible education. She recognises the critical role of teachers within this work. Her hope is that as Sandpiper helps schools to develop strong cultures of care for their staff, both they and the young people they educate will flourish. Before we dive into the detail, I wanted to let you know about a free resource I've created to help you prepare your school for the coming economic impact of the invasion of Ukraine. It's a checklist of things you need to think about and take action on now, and it's designed to prompt strategic conversations around the issues that actually matter. You can download your free copy at www.consultjuliette.co.uk/checklist. Okay, now let's continue with this week's episode. So let's listen to my conversation with Margaret White. So hello, Margaret, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast. It's great to have you here with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here, Juliet. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I am really excited about this conversation because I think actually this topic is a topic that we skirt around quite a lot, but I think it's really important that we get straight to the central part of looking after our school community. So I'm really excited for this conversation. First of all, before we dive into that, I would love to know a little bit more about what led you to this point in your career. Sort of what's the root of your passion for education and kind of the reason that you forged a career sector and then moved out into the role that you have now?
Well, thank you. I think giving children a good education is such a worthwhile thing. It's so important, enabling them to lead a flourishing life and to make a worthwhile contribution to their community later on. And so the holistic care and development of young people couldn't be more important. And so I think there is that sense that it's a really worthwhile thing to be doing. At the same time, I think I always had the feeling that there was every reason why learning should be enjoyable and schools should be happy places. And so that was my sort of starting point in teaching, was wanting to do this very valuable and worthwhile enterprise, but in a way that children would enjoy and that would be thoroughly pleasant and a good experience for everybody. And I worked in teaching for a number of years and then was involved with various different levels of responsibility. And then about 3 years ago, relocated with my husband, which gave me the chance actually to have a fresh think about where I wanted to go next with my career.
Mm. Absolutely. I love that I mean, there's obviously a passion for teaching and for young people, but actually right from the beginning, there was this sense of happiness is essential.
Yes.
For a good education. It is rooted within a happy child.
Yes, I think it's really important. And we know that children learn well if they feel happy, and if they're happy, they learn well. And so it's a virtuous circle. And schools or communities, they're foundational in a child's life, in a young person's life. And I think being able to give young people happy memories of school is a really wonderful gift to be able to give them.
Absolutely. And it's all wrapped up in that love of learning. We have to continue to learn throughout our lives. And
exactly.
And it's pretty hard to love learning if your school experience isn't just kind of through and through happy, although we all know that's not possible 100% of the time. So when we first met, it must have been about 6 months ago now, I was intrigued by the conversation that we had where you were talking about a culture of care. Mm-hmm. Now, I'd love to hear how you define that, what you mean by this phrase, a culture of care within our schools.
Yes, well, all schools, all institutions, all organizations have a culture. I suppose in its simplest way of looking at it, you might say it's the way we do things here. It's that slightly indefinable characteristic or ethos, and it's built on values and attitudes, and it's lived out in actions and behaviors. But I think caring for every member of the community, both staff and pupils, is really important to create that positive environment that we've been talking about, so that teachers can do their jobs well, so that they can contribute to the positive environment we've been talking about. And I think it is part of a school's wider commitment to excellence in every area. And I often think really that excellence boils down to detail. And so if you're thinking about an excellent culture of care, then that really is in the detail of the way each person interacts with each other, the way things are organized, the way things are planned, the way people are spoken to. And so that's what I mean by a culture of care, a culture in which everybody is respected and cared for in the practicalities of daily life.
Absolutely. And I think conversations that we've had actually previously on this podcast are linked to one that's interesting, with a professor from the Durham University who's talking about organizational change. We talked there briefly about culture change. It is incredibly difficult to define the culture of a school, especially of any organization, especially if you're sitting embedded within it and have been there more than about 6 months. It's quite hard to actually see it. But I think that definition of the way we do things around here is a really good way of defining it. And I think you're absolutely right. It is in the detail. And I think so there are a lot of people who say kind of you can't change culture. And I actually don't entirely agree with that. I think you can change culture, but it is incredibly difficult. And the reasons that you've touched on there, it's rooted in values that are shared within the organisation. And it's played out through the actions and behaviours. And it is all about the detail. It's about those little micro interactions between people. That's what makes it so difficult to change it, or to kind of think about how you might change it over time.
Yes, it's a work in progress, like everything else. That and I think all of it. The other thing about a culture is that it's something which is a collective responsibility. So everybody has their part to play in moving the culture to a positive place, or keeping the culture in a positive place. It's not just the responsibility of one person. It's actually something which everybody lives out in their day-to-day interactions and the way they do their work.
I completely agree. And then also thinking about how you want to shift culture. If you've got the community sort of sense that you want to shift a culture, perhaps to be more inclusive, or whatever the sense is, the way you want to move to, it is about everyone taking action, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's about people seeing the value of that and seeing why it's so important, and what a difference it can make.
Absolutely. So let's compare. So when you say a culture of care, we're obviously talking about the pupils and the staff centrally. Obviously the parents, the alumni, all part of that community, but it's the kind of the internal culture of the school on a day-to-day basis, of the interactions between the pupils and the staff. How is this different from well-being? So we've heard a lot of talk over the last kind of 10 years about well-being. It feels to me like there's some overlap, but this is slightly different from just an individual well-being.
Yes, I think a different emphasis. I think well-being we know is hugely important, but it is also impacted by a vast array of things. So our well-being can depend on our domestic situation, our financial situation, what's going on in the country, the global issues, or even the weather, all sorts of things that we actually don't have any control over at all. And they're way beyond anything that we can do much about. But looking after our staff, and that's where my work is mainly focused on, is a culture of care for staff, is something that we can take action on and will impact people's well-being. So people spend quite a lot of their time at work. And so if within that area of people's lives, we're able to operate in such a way that it is positive, it is respectful, it is an environment in which people can do their jobs really well because things are organized smoothly for them, then that does impact well-being. So I suppose the difference is that rather than focusing on well-being, which is something we can't always do all that much about, we're focusing on something we can work at, which will impact well-being.
Yeah, I love that way of looking at it. So it makes it more collective. Well-being is often an individual experience, although you can talk about it in groups, but it's often it can be experienced quite differently from one person to the next. But also it then brings the focus in narrower to the way that a school can impact the well-being of its staff is to actively curate, if you like, a culture of care within the school. Okay, so what was it that made you want to focus on this area in particular within your work?
So I think I bring with me some really positive experiences from working in school, and particularly having worked with strong teams of colleagues who were very supportive, with a great sense of camaraderie and mutual support in our work. But also just conscious that these last 3 academic years have been so disrupted for our children and young people, and for teachers who've had to adapt to different ways of working, rapidly changing different ways of working, not really knowing from one month to the next what's going to happen. And I think that has produced a situation where we need to make sure that we are caring for the carers. Obviously, teachers want to look after the young people in their care as well as they can, and we know that their needs are ongoing, and the impact of the pandemic on children and young people will be felt for a good while yet. And so we want to make sure that we're equipping our teachers as well as we possibly can to work in that supportive way, and that we're making it possible for them to do their jobs as well as they can.
Yeah, and within the independent school sector, obviously, excellent teaching is a hallmark of every school that's competing in an increasingly competitive sector. if you're trying to deliver excellent teaching, having exhausted members of staff standing up day after day is going to be detrimental to the quality of the way that you can provide that over and above experience, a kind of above and beyond standard experience that you might expect in any other school.
I think that's right, because if your teachers are flourishing, if they're going into the classroom with positivity and energy and feeling that they're in a good place, that of course that has good impact on the children's learning, and then that makes for a flourishing school. So it is a positive cycle, and I think we don't choose our pupils over staff or staff over pupils. It's not that at all. It's a sense that actually we want our schools to flourish, and that means everybody doing well in their environment.
So if this was easy, we would have fixed this a long time ago. It's not, it's complex. And one of the reasons for that I can see is this tension between, you want to look after the staff who are in your school, but at the same time, I think that there is also an increasing tension that, we have to be making enough money to be covering the costs of the education. We have to be a viable business. We have to be marketing ourselves out there in the sector, increasing competition. So what are the main barriers that you see schools and staff are facing as they're trying to create a positive culture of care for their staff?
I think there are a couple of things. I think first of all, that we have a time shortage in our schools, as you're saying. We have a limited resource. So schools are typically quite time poor, and what they become very good at doing is the thing that they've done every year, because they always do that, the things which are urgent, because we know that we have to do those and we do them really well, and the things that are strictly speaking essential, so we don't have any choice. By the time you've done that, there isn't a lot of time for anything else, even if it's quite important. And so I think that's one factor. And then I think the other factor is that even if we had more time, we wouldn't be quite sure what to do. So I think there's a little bit of a knowledge gap as well. I can remember, when we were drawing up our plans for an academic year, and we'd be thinking about our priorities for the year as a senior leadership team, and we would say, of course, we must make sure that we are looking after the staff. And then there would be a little bit of a moment of head scratching, thinking, well, what does that mean? Should we should we buy everybody a Christmas meal in a restaurant at the end of term, or would it be that actually they'd like a bit more time to talk one-to-one with a chaplain? And there was this knowledge gap. And so I think what tends to happen when you've got a knowledge gap and you've got a bit of a time gap is you do something. And the something will quite often be, well, let's set up a yoga class, or let's have croissants on a Friday break time. And those things are lovely and they're really appreciated. But I think if we think of a culture of care as being like a building needs foundations, it needs walls, it needs a roof. And the yoga class and the Friday croissants are a little bit like the soft furnishings. They're very greatly appreciated and not to be missed, but there's more besides. They're necessary, but not sufficient.
Absolutely, yes. And I completely agree with your analysis there. I don't think there's been a single kind of strategy session workshop that I've run where, when we're talking about the challenges that we face, lack of time comes up every single time that comes up. And I think you're completely right that then the question becomes, when you do have a small amount of time, there's a sense of panicking into one particular activity that then ticks that box and lets you move on to the next thing. So what are the key actions then? How do we solve this? What are the key things that you recommend when you work with school leaders?
Well, I think there are some common threads that come up that make a real difference and that schools can look at. So I think communication is a really big one, and I think we all know that in our hearts, that to feel well cared for and appreciated, we need to be communicated with well. So that's something, that's an area that can be considered. And I think that includes things like the use of our staff meetings, use of email, how we communicate information, how we communicate change, but also how we listen and how we make opportunities for discussion and people being heard. So that would be one broad area that I would say would be worth thinking about. I think that in terms of groups of people within schools, I would say that middle managers are often the most stretched. So if you wanted to look at a group who maybe would be worth talking to see how they could be supported a bit more, because often they are the ones who are supporting their teams and wanting to make sure that the sort of teachers on the ground in the classroom are doing their jobs as well as they possibly can. But at the same time, those heads of departments and middle managers are also trying to implement the strategy and the changes that the senior leadership have decided needs to be implemented through the school. And so they can feel quite squeezed from both sides. So I think that would be one thing. And I think a third sort of specific to look at if schools were thinking about where could they look at their culture of care would be the induction of new staff. It's really interesting in the survey that we do with Sandpiper, one of the questions we ask is how impressed were you with the school at interview? And that typically scores really highly. But then when it comes on to induction, that typically scores a little bit lower, suggesting that actually that could make a real difference, just to make sure that when new members of staff come, they're well looked after, they're well supported, because we all know if you set off on the right track, you're much more likely to end up in the right place. And so those would be practical things. But I think in terms of the knowledge gap and the time gap, that is where finding some external support can sometimes be helpful. So what I try to do in my work is to come alongside a school as an objective friend, that fresh pair of eyes that you were talking about that you lose after 6 months in, and just say, we can do an anonymous survey, we can find out how your staff are feeling about things, so that we can plug that knowledge gap. And then, because this is what my time is dedicated to while I'm working with you, actually we can plug that time gap in terms of coming up with a plan. And so that's really what I'm aiming to do in my work. And of course, there's so much to celebrate as well. And I think it's really important to say that there's typically schools seem to have a really good sense of collegiality and appreciation, and our independent schools, our teachers feel well resourced in what they're doing. So generally there's a really strong foundation to build on it. We're not talking about a disaster that needs fixing. Yeah. We're talking about something that's good that can be even better.
Absolutely.
And that's really what I'm interested in helping schools to do.
I absolutely, I couldn't say that strongly enough, that a lot of the examples that you see within the independent school sector, it is really good sense of care for people. I think what gets lost is a sense of understanding the pressures that people are actually in on an individual level. And so that first piece that you mentioned there, the communications piece, which encompasses quite a lot of different things, but that listening strand of that is critically important, because it's not that, even if you were to go in and work with 80-90% of independent schools, even you might come up with trends, but you couldn't go to another school and say, right, you've got to fix this and this. You would have to go and ask those staff. You'd have to ask them, what's your experience? What is it that's preventing you from feeling your best at work, to help us to create this culture of care within the school? And it will be unique to individual members of staff, to teams, and to school cultures as well. And so it's only through that listening piece that you can really unlock and it may be that you don't have much budget, that's fine. What are the small things that you're going to be really appreciated by people? Is it the Christmas dinner, or is it a bit more time to go and do some yoga, or whatever it might be, whatever it is that's appreciated. If you can funnel your time and budgetary resource there, that listening has to come first, doesn't it?
It does. And it comes back to what we said at the beginning. It's about detail. And it's not a broad brush approach. It's about getting alongside people, finding out what those little tiny friction points are that can be smoothed over, that just make the day better for everybody, and mean that the teaching in the classroom can be absolutely what we would want it to be. And the focus is on that, so that our children and young people can flourish and our schools can be successful.
Absolutely. I'm fascinated that you mentioned the middle managers. I think there's, if you don't have the time or resource to do a full survey, just some chats with that middle management will give you a sense of what's happening in your school, because the middle managers, as you said, are squeezed from all angles in terms of their time. So they're probably feeling pretty stretched. So it's a good place to start your conversations. but also they have the benefit that they can see day to day how those people in their teams are finding things. And so It may be that they can give you some initial pointers as to where you can have an impact and changes that you could make, which doesn't necessarily mean that you can avoid asking everyone, because I think that is important. But maybe if you're just starting off and wanting to make some immediately steps forward on this, if you're listening to this, then maybe some kind of targeted conversations with those middle managers, heads of department and so on is really important.
And sometimes it's the casual conversation, it's just passing somebody on the path or in the corridor and saying, how's your work going? How's your day going? And stopping to listen to the answer, and building up those relationships of trust and honesty and openness, so that we can have those conversations and know that they're going to be taken forwards in a really positive way.
And interestingly, we've talked about teaching staff in particular. Naturally, as we talk about schools, our thoughts turn to the teaching staff. This is also the support staff or the non-teaching staff as well, isn't it? And sometimes there's some work that could be done to bring all of the staff to feel like they're all kind of delivering the same, like pushing in the same direction. They're all supporting each other, and there isn't this division or tension or just a separation between the teaching staff and the support staff as well.
I think it's really important. A school is a community, a diverse community, and everybody in that community needs to be cared for. So when we talk about staff, yes, definitely, I'm thinking of teaching and operational staff. Everybody's pulling together. It doesn't matter in a sense what the job is or what the role is. The fact is that the culture of care should be the same for everybody. And certainly the work that I do with Sandpiper in our surveys would be covering everybody who works at the school. And that can include peripatetic staff as well, who sometimes can be a little bit overlooked in this sort of thing because they are typically self-employed and they're going from place to place. But when they come into our school for the day, we want them to feel that they're part of the community as well. So it can include people to that extent who are sometimes there and sometimes not part-time, full-time, operational support, teaching, management, leadership, because actually right through, everybody needs to be cared for.
Absolutely. And actually, just as you said at the end, it's also the way that the governors are caring for those senior leaders as well, the head, and then the kind of very small number of people around the head who are supporting them in that executive kind of level. That's a really important kind of sense of a caring relationship as well, isn't it?
It is, because the levels of responsibility held by those people are enormous, and that is a big burden. These are people who want to do a good job, who recognise that caring for the futures of vast numbers of children and young people is a significant and weighty responsibility, and to know that they're being looked out for as well is, as you say, is really important.
Thank you so much for your time today, Margaret. It's been really interesting to dive into this conversation. I think this is an area that everyone feels is important, but perhaps we haven't had the language to place around it and to understand the structure of what it is that we can do within our schools. So tell us briefly where people can contact you if they want to find out a little bit more about what you're doing with schools.
Thank you. So my consultancy is called Sandpiper. So if you want to find that online, look at the website, www.sandpiperconsulting.org will take you there, and you can read about what I do, what I offer in terms of coming alongside schools and partnering with them, walking along with them on this particular journey. I'm really happy to have a conversation with anybody who would like to have a chat about it as well. And there's contact details there with an email address. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch.
Thank you, Margaret. And I'll put a link to the website on the episode notes as well. Thank you so much for your time today, Margaret. A really important conversation.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.